This is the second part of our content on Chapter 12, groups. This is focusing on the power of groups. So we'll define a group based on the way your book describes it, a collection of individuals who have relations to one another that makes them interdependent to some significant degree. So we're interdependent. That means that we are dependent on the roles of others in some way. So think about what groups you belong to based on that definition. Groups where you're interdependent. You depend on them for some things and they equally depend on you. So we consider these your in-group. Who is your in-group? How important is this group to you? Who's not in the in-group? So social psychology describes these as in-groups and out-groups. An in-group is a group we're a part of or identify with, perhaps genetically, culturally, socially, ideologically, or based on abilities, skills, interest, hometown. Those people that you feel oneness with as distinct from others. Your out-group is the opposite of an in-group, a group we don't identify as being part of or who aren't a part of genetically, culturally, ideologically, or based on ability, skills, interest, hometown. So we form in-groups, and often those in-groups necessitate an out-group. So we can't have one without the other. So there's sort of a duality there that says, oh, we're always going to be in opposition to something. So if you and I have something in common, then de facto, like other people who don't have that in common become part of the out-group, unless we are really wise about our exchanges. So there are some implications. So first off, we have a form of bias where we tend to describe the out-group as homogeneous, meaning we think about them as all the same. We can see differences in our own group, but we judge that out-group as everyone is the same. And this little illustration does this. Bees getting together saying all ants are the same, and the ants getting together and saying all bees look alike. And we may recognize some of these in ourselves. And then the second implication is solidarity. Any opposing action by an out-group strengthens the cohesion of an in-group. So if you really want to make your opponents strong, take action against them. They'll come together tighter. You can maybe see this in politics and things like that. So how do groups affect our performance? Or in other words, do you perform better or worse when others are around? So think about jogging. Would you do a better run when others are around, or would it be worse? Okay, which way is it going to be better for you? I don't know about you, but for me, I tend to do my best in this kind of group where I'm running by myself, but in the company of others. I don't do very well running in a group where I have to be chatting. That doesn't work well for me. And running alone, sometimes it's good, but sometimes I get lazy. So I get better at this situation. How about this? Studying something difficult, writing your dissertation or a major paper that you really want to do well on. So are you going to do better right here in this quiet library, or in this library where there are other people around but you're still working independently? Or what about this situation where you're working with all of these other people together and kind of talking? So think about yourself. You should know this about yourself. But there are some common trends in people. So here's some more situations. How about this? You're for the first time riding this unicycle. Are you going to do better with an audience or without? Or how about this? You have to solve a really complex problem. Are you going to do better with an audience or without? What if you are really good at one or the other of these things? You're a really good unicycle rider. Are you going to do better then? With an audience or without? So these are the factors that make a difference in whether audiences help you or not. Social facilitation. So performance improves according to research or group data. Performance tends to improve when we have an audience, but only under certain conditions. So when it's something you're good at, a skill you've mastered, the audience is going to make you perform better. And when it's fairly simple, it's not complex, it doesn't require a lot of deep concentration, then you're going to do better with an audience. But if you have an audience for a skill you haven't mastered, you're going to do worse. Or if it's really complex, you're going to do worse. I had thought about this movie Free Solo. I don't know if you had thought about this movie. It's climbing, and I know that I know that there are objections to doing that sometimes in Navajo culture, but nevertheless, this person was a climber, and he climbed without any ropes protecting him. So that is, if he falls, he dies. And so this was a movie about this climb that he did on this one particular rock, and they wanted to film him, but the presence of the filming crew interfered with his performance. And so that was something they had to work through for quite a long time. He had to get so good at it and practice this particular climb so many times so that he could do it on autopilot without thinking. And then when he did that, his performance improved under the cameras. An illustration of this concept. And the trailer is there if you want to see it. So Zhang's model then of social facilitation suggests that the mere presence of others up here in the green leads to arousal. And we're talking about this cortical arousal, like a heightened, it's not a stress reaction, it's just that your sympathetic nervous system is, your heart is just beating a little bit faster, you're just, you're alert, let's say. And so that leads to an increase in your dominant response tendencies. So your dominant response is what comes naturally with less thought. So that's beneficial on simple, well-learned tasks. In that case, the dominant response is the correct response. So if you already know what to do, then you're going to do better at it in the presence of others, and your performance is facilitated. But your dominant response isn't going to be best on a difficult or a novel task because you're not experienced enough to do it, and in that case your performance is impaired. So this is Zhang's model of social facilitation, and there's a little video on this that you might find helpful or interesting as well. So continuing on, we ask then, do groups help or hinder our group decision making? And so we can think about having to make a decision with a big group of people, all this negotiating, right? It's challenging. So think about if it's this question, where should we go for lunch today? What things are you going to be thinking about? To what extent is harmony within the group beneficial? And so in this case, or what about this? What if it's this decision you have to make? Should we double the rents in the apartment building we just bought? How important would harmony be in that situation? So we think about harmony as keeping everyone happy. So where should we go for lunch today? How important is it to keep people happy, to have harmony? Should we double the rents in the apartment building we just bought? Is harmony beneficial? Is keeping everyone happy beneficial in that decision? Should we separate families at the border? How about that decision? So harmony is the factor we're looking at, keeping everyone happy, because that seems to play a role in group decision making. So the goal matters. So you have to always know if the group decision has one where harmony is the most important thing, like where do you go for lunch? In that case, it's best just to go along, right? Because it doesn't really matter where you eat your lunch. You want to just keep everyone happy. But it really does matter if you're making really big decisions, like whether to build a wall. In that case, you better seek voices that aren't going to give harmony because you need lots of perspectives to come to a good decision. So you can think about this in the Navajo Nation, perhaps, in terms of tribal council decisions. Are they seeking multiple perspectives, or are they trying for harmony? Are they getting people on their groups that they get along with and feel easy with, but that might not be the best group for complex issues in which you need multiple perspectives? So we think about here, everyone kind of following along, the first guy who has a dog, and groupthink is this concept in which everyone kind of seeks harmony. They just want to get along. I have an idea. That was my idea. I was thinking the same thing. And they all go to the same conclusion, and it might just be completely a wrong conclusion, but because they're seeking a goal of harmony instead of making the wisest decision, then it's not good. So if they're talking about where to go for lunch, this is great. If they're talking about whether to double rents or whether to have a mask mandate, that's not great. So you break groupthink by getting some people in who don't have the same idea. So maybe someone says, that's a good one. Where did that come from? Did you know about? Thanks. Now I have a better idea. So having different voices, someone from the outside come in, is how we break groupthink. And I do have a little video here for you to see as well about refuting groupthink. So groupthink is faulty thinking by highly cohesive groups characterized by, we ask people to guess how many jelly beans are in the jar. There's actually 390 jelly beans. And so the reason I say this is because if you asked a whole bunch of people, we ask 600 people how many jelly beans are in this jar, then, and you average out all their answers, you're going to come to about the right answer. So sometimes it's beneficial to have lots of different views, but we have to make sure we don't do that on decisions that really require nuanced thinking. So groupthink is a phenomenon where people tend to conform with group decisions to avoid feeling outcast, leading to errors in decision making. In that case, it's shallow examination of information because they're seeking a goal of harmony, not making a good decision. There's not much consideration of alternatives. People aren't really pushing in the alternatives. There's a sense of invulnerability because you're all in a group, nobody's really responsible. There's an illusion of unanimity, but that's because people aren't speaking. So you can see these people in this illustration are thinking they don't agree, but they're not saying it because they don't want to violate harmony. There's a sense of moral superiority. Again, you have the allegiance of this whole group. And the risks are overstrong leaders have an undue influence and usually lead the group astray. And I had an example of this in some colleagues at my old university. When there was an evaluation of the chair, Frank was a really well-respected faculty member, and we had some new faculty members who had some challenges with the chair because he hadn't really given them a good orientation. A really good guy, really supportive of faculty, but he had kind of made it rough for some new faculty, and we had to do a group evaluation of our chair. And one person just spoke right out, and when he sent out the note that said we need to do this group evaluation, he immediately gave his opinion and what we should put in the evaluation. And right there, that he was an overstrong leader because he had so much experience and respect. And so his stating his opinion probably made it harder for those new faculty to state their opinions. So that's a risk of groupthink. And self-censorship based on harmony. That means this is what we're seeing here, where people are not speaking their minds because of the goal of harmony. A second phenomenon is the bystander effect, a situation in which the presence of others discourages an individual from intervening in an emergency situation. So you can see here there's a lot of people, there's someone on the ground, and so because everyone else is walking by this person, nobody stops to help. Everyone thinks, well, this must be okay. Everyone's just walking by. And that's sort of like if you see a car, well, nowadays with cell phones it's different, but in the old days, if there was a car stranded alongside the road, you would stop to help. People didn't have cell phones. You'd stop and make sure everything's okay. But sometimes if nobody was stopping, it made it harder to stop because you figured, oh, well, he must be okay then. Other people would have stopped if he wasn't okay. That's sort of the bystander effect. It's because of diffusion of responsibility. All these people together now, if one of these people had walked by alone, he or she would have probably stopped to help. But because all of these people are walking by, nobody stops to help. The responsibility is diffuse, so nobody takes responsibility. And we can think of this as some of the efforts that you might put together, like we're going to start this club or we're going to start this initiative. But if too many people are in leadership, nobody takes responsibility and it doesn't happen. And there's also within this, a tendency to join short-term in-groups, taking action or avoiding action based on the decisions of others. So it's like these 4 people have joined an in-group here of people who aren't helping this guy. And so now they all share this. They feel stronger because they've all made the same decision. This is like an in-group. And so if one of these people had helped, all of them might have stopped to help. So that's the bystander effect as being part of that in-group, out-group phenomenon. Next, we'll just look at the power of groups, leaders, and mobs. And so we can think of leadership and power. So characteristics of leaders are usually these components: expertise and skills, so they have to know their stuff. They have the social skills to build cohesion and the capacity to provide rewards to people. So they have like the money bag, the social skills, and the expertise. Think about leaders you know and whether they possess these 3 things. Capacity to provide rewards could be just, say, they can delegate funds or something like that. But are we swayed too much by personality at the expense of some of these other things? So I had some politicians' roles up here. I don't want to use our main politicians, but we might just think about if we know about any of these people, to what extent are we influenced by personality? So power is the ability to control one's own outcomes and the outcomes of others. And it combines status, which is respect and prominence, with authority, which is a formal role or position where you can, say, make rules over others, and then dominance, which is behavior intended to show power. So this is how we define power. And we ask here whether power corrupts. And yes, it often does. So approach inhibition theory. Being in power may lead to ignoring constraints normally experienced by individuals. So there are, these are some interesting studies about the type of vehicles that would stop for a pedestrian in a crosswalk. And so with people who had nicer cars, they were more likely to violate pedestrian laws, like not stop for a pedestrian, and more likely to cut off other drivers. So that's a sense of entitlement that plays out pretty seriously. And higher social classes were also more likely to take valued goods from others. So again, a sense of entitlements. More likely to lie in a negotiation, to cheat to increase their chances of winning a prize, and to endorse unethical behaviors at work. And so we have sort of an in-group phenomenon going on because of this approach inhibition theory, that if you're in a position of power, people tend to think that those rules don't apply to them. And once again, think of people who are in power within your social organization, and do they violate these rules that are set for other people? These people are also less concerned with harmony, these people in higher social classes or people who have power. They're more likely to apply stereotypes, and they're not very good at reading others' emotions. So think about how we learn to read others' emotions. We learn to when their emotions impact us. But if you're in power, the emotions of others don't really impact you. And so you don't develop your skill in understanding others' emotions. We might question whether women in general tend to be more attentive to others' emotions than males. Could this have been a trait that evolved because women tend to have lower status and have had to develop the ability to read emotions better than others? Now, moving on to another topic. If you could be totally invisible for 24 hours and be assured that nobody would see you, what would you do? Kind of a creepy question, but think about it a minute. So then we get into the power of mobs, and it's a phenomenon called deindividuation. So deindividuation is when a person in a group loses individual identity and self-awareness and takes on the identity of the group. So if you go someplace, I don't know if maybe this could happen in a ceremony in the Navajo tradition, but deindividuation is when there's so many people around, nobody is really aware of you as an individual anymore. So you engage in behavior that you wouldn't normally engage in. So we can think of these kind of spring break parties, or Halloween is a circumstance where you can dress as someone you're not. And maybe these protesters, maybe they got caught up in this mob situation. They de-individuated and did things that, had it not been for the group, they would not have done. So de-individuation, again, this behavior where you engage in things that aren't typical of you because you lose your sense of individual identity. And it includes diminished self-observation. You are observing and monitoring your own behaviors less, so you're evaluating yourself less, and you have less concern about what other people think of you. And so these mob or these big group situations that people get into sometimes are done for this process of de-individuation, a release from that self-consciousness. So self-awareness and individuation, well, if we become aware of ourselves, then we're less likely to engage in those behaviors that we might do if we're in a mob. And so how could we make people aware of themselves if they're in a mob? Well, one way they did it comes through Charles Cooley's studies of looking glass self. And in that, you ask yourself, how do I appear to others? What must others think of me? And then we revise our own self-image based on how we think about ourselves. And so it's like you're looking in the mirror, and this mirror is your imagining of how another person thinks of you. We looked at this model at the start of the semester, and we talked about the studies that led to it. The looking glass self, you'll remember the trick-or-treat basket that said, take one candy. And we discovered that kids were less likely to take more than one candy if there was a mirror there where they could see themselves. And that invoked the looking glass self.